And the regular session of the Lancaster Planning Commission is now in session. Our invocation tonight will be offered by Commissioner Berkey, and the Pledge of Allegiance will be led tonight by Commissioner Molly. If you please stand.
Let's pray. Well, Father, we're so thankful, Lord, for you tonight, Father, for your sovereignty and watching over us in the city. I pray, Lord, that you would be with us tonight. Give us wisdom from on high as only you can. Thank you, Lord, for the great rain that you've brought. And give people safety in this rain. And, Lord, I pray, Father, that you'd be with us as we go through these matters tonight. And help us, Lord, to make decisions that would be right with you and right with the community and just do the right thing. I pray, Lord, that you'd be with us now in all the things we do tonight. These things I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Please put your right hand on your heart and let's pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have the roll call, please?
Commissioners Larry Berkey.
Here.
Cassandra Harvey.
Here.
Dana Haycock.
Here.
Dan Jacobs.
Here.
Raj Malley.
Here.
Vice Chair Sammy Smith.
Here.
Chairman James Vose.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Public business from the floor. If an individual is unable to stay through the entire meeting due to extenuating circumstances, a total of 10 minutes is offered at this time, during which input may be given regarding agenda items. Individual speakers would be limited to 2 minutes each. Do we have any early speakers, Mr. Ludicky?
None that have requested, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Any person who would like to address the Commission on any agendized item is requested to complete a speaker's card for the recording secretary and identify the agenda item you would like to discuss. Each person will be given an opportunity to address the Commission at the time such item is discussed by the Planning Commission. Speaker's cards are available at the rear of the chambers. Individual speakers will be limited to 3 minutes each. We have some additions that have been provided to us tonight. The minutes of the December 21st meeting and excuse me. We already had the minutes. Agenda item 3, we had a revision of the staff report, which was provided. Agenda item number 4, the resolution was provided. And agenda item number 5, there was a change on page 2 and on the condition list on page 2. So we all had that passed out to us earlier. The first item tonight is our consent agenda, approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of December 21st, 2009. May I have a motion, please?
I'll make a motion that we approve the regular meeting of Lancaster Planning Commission from December 21st, 2009.
Thank you.
A second.
Thank you. All right. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Next item is continued public hearings. Conditional use permit 0908. The applicant are Brothers Pena, Inc. It's a conditional use permit for on-sale and consumption of alcoholic beverages, type 47 license. Let's see. Do we have a staff report, please?
Chairman Vose and Commissioners, the applicant is requesting a conditional use permit for on-site sale and consumption of alcohol in an existing restaurant. A conditional use permit is required for the on-site sale of beer, wine, and distilled spirits per Lancaster Municipal Code. The restaurant has been operating as a bona fide restaurant at its current location for approximately 1 year, and the restaurant is exempt from the city's alcohol ordinance distance requirements since it's a bona fide restaurant and is located within the commercial district of the downtown specific plan. The Los Angeles County Sheriff was not opposed to the issuance of a conditional use permit based on their investigation, and the applicant has agreed to the conditions. The proposed project meets the requirements of the zone and will not adversely affect the nearby residents or businesses. The conditions of approval have been included, which would ensure that the safety and general welfare of the surrounding area would be maintained. The alcohol sales will complement the existing restaurant. Staff believes the Planning Commission should make a favorable determination in support of the proposal. And that concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions of anyone? All right, this is a continued public hearing, so the public hearing is still open. Since we did not receive an uncontested letter, do we have an applicant to address us tonight? If you state your name, please, for the record.
Ruth A. Sanchez.
Thank you.
Pretty much we would just would like to have the CUP being honored to us. We believe that we can be a contribution to the city, in expanding our business, being that business has decreased based on sales in our facility. I did sign that letter. We don't have it, but however, we do agree to all the conditions that they've been issued to us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any other speakers, Mr. Ludicky?
I have no other speakers on this item, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Then without objection, the public hearing on this matter is closed, and we'll consider a motion.
I move the motion to adopt resolution number 10-02 approving conditional use permit numbers 09-08.
Thank you. Have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. All right. Any further discussion? It's been moved and seconded. Then please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The next item is a continued public hearing on tentative parcel map number 66115. The applicant is Mr. Bondinelli, and it's a request to subdivide 49 acres plus into 45 industrial lots in a light industrial zone. So we have a staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. As you indicated, this item has been continued over from your December 21st meeting. At that meeting, there were some concerns raised by the Commission in regards to the environmental studies and the initial study that was done on the project. At the request of the Commission, we did forward to you the biological, the Phase 1 hazardous and archaeological studies. We also forwarded to you for your review a letter from the California Department of Fish and Game in regards to the proposed project. You have had those for several weeks. At this point, it's really kind of the Commission's issue as to whether or not you are satisfied with those studies, whether you feel that or whether you feel they don't, in fact, justify the environmental findings as proposed, and if not, what direction you might give on correcting that. So you have a potential range of actions before you, anything from approval of the project as proposed, which is the current staff recommendation, to some level of revision or re-review of the environmental documents, or possibly, potentially even the preparation of a different type of environmental document, depending on what your belief is from a Commission standpoint. So we'll try to answer any questions you may have, and I do believe the representative of the applicant is present if you have questions for them. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ludicky. Any questions or comments from the members before we hear from the applicant? All right. So, for the record, we did receive a letter dated January 12th from the applicant's representative, Mr. Muntz indicating they agree with the staff's recommendation and accept all the conditions of approval as recommended. So, Mr. Muntz, would you care to address the commission tonight? Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Barry Munns, 129 West Ponderas Street. I am representing the applicant, Carlo Bonanelli. Here, he's also here this evening. As with the public hearing meeting that we had in December, there were some questions as to the environmental studies that were done. Most particularly at that point in time was the Phase 1 environmental site assessment. It did not specifically address some potential hazardous material that might exist on site. The report stated that they did not find any. However, some of the other studies showed some trash piles that may contain something. That was basically the question, as I recall, we went through. So there was some question whether the study supported the environmental findings, as Mr. Ludicky has stated. Another question that arose was the age of the studies. This project has been ongoing for several years. Those studies were done approximately 4 years ago. Do those studies need to be updated and so forth for this project? Subsequent to that meeting, it was only a few days later, we got a letter from the Department of Fish and Game. They had some concerns as well in regards to the studies. However, speaking to the consultant that prepared the biological study, they looked at the conditions of approval that the city has put on the project from the mitigated native deck standpoint. There's burrowing owl, nesting bird surveys, as well as trapping study for the Mojave ground squirrel. They felt that that the staff's conditions and their recommendations in the report covered really what Fish and Game's concerns were. Fish and Game brought up some procedural issues, but subsequent conversations with Fish and Game, they tended to agree that potentially it's not required that when the consultant goes to the site, they do not have to do one study at a time. That would mean that they'd have to go back to the site 4 different times. This was one of the items that Fish and Game had brought up in regards to the procedures and how the studies were conducted. It's something that Fish and Game does have within their policies on procedures. However, they have even agreed that may not be something that really is a practical or reasonable request of all these consultants when they prepare the studies. Based on that type of information, we did not think that the Fish and Game response necessarily, impacted the Commission's findings, other than the fact that they also questioned the age of the studies as well as the Commission had in the previous meeting. Basically, with that, we're prepared to follow through with this project, in whichever direction the Commission would like us to proceed at this time. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Thank you. There may be some.
Thank you.
Anyone? No? I have a few, Mr. Muntz. If I understood your statement, you indicated that you've had some interaction with Department of Fish and Game, California Department of Fish and Game. Do you have anything in writing from them changing their position?
I do not. Those conversations actually took place this afternoon with Scott Harris at Fish and Game, with the consultant, Sharon Doherty from Circle Mountain. She'd been trying to get in touch with them for some time. As with Fish and Game's normal habit, they respond very well on the day of hearings, but it is somewhat difficult to get in touch with them leading up to public hearings. as evidenced by their response the day of the hearing for the last meeting.
Being very kind in your remarks about Fish and Game.
Politically correct.
Well, you know, I'm sure you understand that the commission has to judge the evidence that's presented to us. We have a staff report, we have writings from various consultants, we have writings from Department of Fish and Game, and we have your testimony. And that's really all we have at this point. So when Department of Fish and Game indicates that that they do not recognize consultant studies, in one case older than 1 year and in another case older than 2 years, and the studies that have been presented to us are in excess of 4 years old, how do you suppose we should react to that?
Well, that was a concern when I originally read this as well, and then as I mentioned in follow-up conversations with our consultant, they looked at the conditions that the city has put on this project and the various studies that are required. And in the conversations, you know, and unfortunately we have nothing to substantiate that conversation before us. I was told that Fish and Game did somewhat agree with the fact that we are going back out and requiring these studies to be done prior to any ground disturbing activities that might take place on the site.
So the consultant that Circle Mountain Biological Consultants, that's who you're
Yes.
referring to?
Yes.
No one here is from that firm tonight?
No, under such short notice, I didn't know that she was going to be able to even have the conversations with Fish and Game. Didn't know that there would be a need to have her here without additional information. And it was a conversation I had with her about 4 o'clock this afternoon.
But as we discussed last time this was before us, there is clearly a contradiction in, or not a contradiction necessarily, but a number of inconsistencies in the 3 reports that were provided to us between the Phase 1 and the biological as well as the historical.
There's from an inconsistency standpoint.
And based on that, Department of Fish and Game issued their letter acknowledging the age of the reports, indicating that they were not satisfied that the age of the reports met the minimum requirements under the Fish and Game regulations. They also commented about issues as they relate that there's really no study or discussion of the stream bed issues on the site, that they indicated that they would like to see further analysis of the potential Joshua Tree woodland, whether in fact it is or it isn't. The studies were absent that information, and so forth. Would you disagree with that these issues need to be evaluated before we can make a reasonable finding?
Well, one thing that was pointed out by our consultant earlier in our conversations with Fish and Game is, for some reason, Fish and Game or Scott Harris today did not have all pages of the biological study available to him to review. Now that was today during the conversation. He didn't have those pages. It was like, well, why don't you have those pages? He said, well, I just can't find them right now. Kind of remark that he had. We don't know for sure whether he had the entire report to review or not. Nonetheless, I don't think that would really change much of anything that they've responded here. As for the jurisdictional issues regarding drainage, that's one of the conditions of the report or of the project, is that we do need to go back and look at whether there's a stream bed alteration permit required The project is conditioned for that type of activity that might be needed. There was, as you mentioned, there was some inconsistencies with the initial reports in the identification of some of the material that might be on site. There was also, the Swainson Hawk issue, which is really something that Fish and Game is concerned about, but what they're looking at is they have a certain area that they know this hawk to be nesting. They're looking for somebody to actually look on a map and tell them that this project is within 10 miles of that nesting area or outside of that 10-mile nesting area. That could, that was one of the items here that they said that could impact maybe some of the mitigation. However, even Fish and Game felt that the city had a fairly strong handle on some of the mitigation measures that were necessary for this.
But again, that's what you're telling us. However, we have nothing in writing from Fish and Game to
No, I
support
do
that
not.
position, do we?
No,
Okay.
no.
Let's talk about the development of the project, the nearly 50-acre project that is proposed to be developed into a 45-lot industrial subdivision. Our staff report indicates that the applicant, is proposing to develop the project one lot at a time. Could you explain to us how that happens in a comprehensive development that requires infrastructure development, all the undergrounding, all the utilities? How do you accomplish that one lot at a time?
It's one lot at a time is really the building development of the project. The actual development of the project will take place in several phases. From an infrastructure standpoint, streets, utilities, that type of infrastructure that's needed to support the overall development is going to be phased. We've proposed 3 different phases. Phase 1A consisted of, I believe, 9 or 10 lots. Phase 1B consisted of 8 lots thereabout, and then Phase 2 consisted of the remaining lots. That would be the construction of purely the infrastructure of the streets and the various utilities. The actual development of each individual lot will be on an individual basis. They will probably, for the most part, sell off these lots as basically finished lots to individuals, business owners, and so forth that will want to construct their own building, and then those different individuals will actually develop that lot on their own, go to the city, obtain the necessary permits to construct, whether it be a warehouse, whether it be an office building, whatever the type of development they want to do. That's where the individual development, each lot will be developed on an individual basis. That's where that comes from. Is that
so when on your plan it indicates grading of each lot will be done upon development of the individual lot. If I understand what you just said, you will be grading each phase to develop the infrastructure, but not necessarily grading each lot. How do you propose to build infrastructure and not touch the lots?
the grading that will take place will be all within the street right-of-way, and that there is grading that will take place as a portion of the infrastructure development. That development will take, that type of construction activity will take place within the right-of-way. There will be, depending on street elevations and grades, there could be some construction activity outside of the street right-of-ways that are dedicated on the map.
That's what I would suspect as well. So
there might even be some stockpiling of material on one of the lots, depending on balancing of earthwork for that infrastructure.
which gets back to our environmental review, which was predicated on a single lot or a phased development, not the entire project. So when you're impacting potentially streambed alteration or some other biological issue. I think we have a conflict here between what's been presented, at least from my chair, what's been presented to the commission relative to the studies and reports based on the application and what you're now telling us related to how the project will be developed.
I could see where there could be some gray area in the understanding of how that is to take place. It's never been our intent that we would only build one lot and the infrastructure on one lot as it goes.
I don't understand how you would deal with flood control, storm sewer, that type of thing, relative to each phase of this project. It's certainly not going to go east. It's going to go west, I assume.
For the most part, yes. All the drainage heads in a northwesterly direction.
Which would impact potentially the Amargosa Creek drainage area?
Our project does not necessarily involve the Amargosa Creek, and for the most part, the drainage ends up on Avenue L before it gets to the creek, based on the topography of the area out there. In that northwesterly direction, it joins the creek basically at Avenue L. Is about where, some of the portion of it may join a little quicker, some of it a little further downstream. The Amargosa Creek does not necessarily front on our property. It's
Recognize that, but you've got 45 lot drainage, which for the most part will be impervious soil, all right?
yes.
The streets, building footprint, the parking lots, maybe 10 or 15%, if I'm generous, 20% of the site would be,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
Impervious. So what are you going to do with the water?
That water
To
will
go into some sort of form of storm sewer, which hasn't been addressed relative to the environmental impacts, is from my point of view.
Okay, well, yeah, from not necessarily from an environmental impact standpoint, but from a development of the project standpoint. We prepared some studies. We looked at the drainage. We looked at the street systems and so forth. Based on the street capacities, they will handle the storm runoff based on the studies that we've done from this particular development. There are some requirements of public works that require that we handle the drainage in certain ways. I'm not sure, right now, I'm not sure how that development, whether we end up having to do some on-site mitigation, and I would expect that there will be, depending on how the development takes place, that there's going to be some kind of on-site mitigation of those stormwater flows. Obviously, Public Works will not allow us to dump water into the Amargosa Creek without mitigating it for potential pollutants. Whether that be stormwater clarifiers or some method of filtration of the water before it's released from our site.
Detention basins, maybe,
Yes.
which again hasn't been dealt with in our environmental document. Okay. All right, that's all I have. Anyone have anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have questions of staff? Do we have any speakers? I'm sorry.
I have no other cards, Mr.
All
Chairman.
right, no one else wants to speak on this matter? All right, then, without objection, the public hearing is closed, and anyone have anything to say? Speak right up.
I did. Mr. Ludicky, the staff has recommended approval of this project, and there's been concerns from the commission and other parties about the age of the studies and the consistency of the studies. I'm curious, why is that not a concern of the staff, or is it a concern and not a large enough concern to not recommend this project for approval?
I think the latter would be the correct statement. In general, we would want everything to line up cleanly And I will tell you that certainly procedurally and from an information standpoint, not everything in this lines up cleanly. However, from looking at it and from having our environmental person look at it and my review of it, I don't think, well, there's two things. Number one, I don't think that the differences in the reports are significant enough that they would change the final recommendations of staff from what I know at this point. I think that the conclusions remain the same. The second thing, despite the concerns raised by the Department of Fish and Game, it is not our belief that the site is a biologically significant site, although if you look at some of the things that they've stated, certainly you can make an argument that some of the studies do not necessarily match their protocol and do not necessarily address apparently a concern that they may have on rare plants that may be present. And in their defense, and I rarely defend Fish and Game, but I will defend them in this one instance, there have been found, not ironically in pristine areas, but they have found in previous studies further north on the Amargosa Channel, where it's been improved actually near the freeway, they have found stands of plants that they consider rare or endangered. Ironic places for them to be found, but they have found them there. Now, going back to this particular site, and one of the reasons that staff, I would say, is perhaps a little more positioned to recommend approval here. When the Amargosa specific plan was being done, there were extensive studies done on the 160-acre Amargosa Creek general site to the north of Avenue L. Those included trapping surveys for Mojave ground squirrel, surveys for desert tortoise, all of which were done in the spring of 2005, which, if you may recall, was after a very wet winter. It included the biological look. It included everything that may possibly have been important on that property. Now, I'm not saying that what you don't find on one property doesn't mean you won't find something on the other, but by and large, the reports that came back from biologists were that the Amargosa Creek in this area was not a significant biological item. I think that when you look at the condition of the site that's out there, the degradation that's occurred to it, we think that the same applies to this particular site from a biological standpoint. However, if you ask me to go back and show you exactly where in the report it says that the loss of the Joshua trees are not significant, or that, you know, this study was done in accordance with protocol, I can't show that to you. So in the sense of, if someone were to challenge it and say, hey, you didn't follow the exact protocol, not everything lines up cleanly, there's an argument to be made there. But I don't think it's a strong enough argument at this point that staff would recommend, you know, of our own volition going back and redoing anything. But if you as a commissioner are not comfortable with it, then by all means, that's within your authority to go back and ask them to redo studies or relook at some specific items that you may not have a comfort level with.
Can I ask you also to give us a brief outline of the conditions and mitigations that would give us a comfort level with the inconsistencies that we're seeing in this project?
Well, I think that the most important and the species that are most likely to occur on the site, which are burrowing owl, and there have been within the Amargosa area, you know, found evidence of that in the past. We will require, as we do with just about every project, that prior to any kind of ground disturbance, that they do have to do a walkover of the site prior to that ground disturbance occurring. That ground disturbance issue applies not only to the potential for burrowing owls, it applies also to the potential for any kind of nesting birds if we're within the season for nesting. So they would have to do that kind of a study. The second thing, and it addresses the issue of whether or not a streambed alteration agreement is necessary, we do state within the report that it is the responsibility and obligation of the applicant to verify with Fish and Game whether or not they're going to require a stream bed alteration agreement. We have had a back and forth with Fish and Game on this whole issue for a number of years, and what they have told us is that they are the final determiner of whether or not a stream bed alteration agreement is required. Therefore, you will rarely find, unless you have a pretty extensive biological report done, us coming to a conclusion that yes, a stream bed alteration agreement is required, or no, it's not. We have told applicants and continue to tell them there's a potential that this drainage is jurisdictional. You need to go and check with Fish and Game as to whether or not they're going to require you a stream bed alteration agreement and whatever appropriate mitigation measures and studies are associated with that. In the case of the Amargosa specific plan, as I mentioned earlier, we did the same thing. We said, it's very clear that you need a stream bed alteration agreement, but Fish and Game set the mitigation for that as a part of their stream bed alteration process. So I think that from our standpoint, we can address pretty easily their concerns over stream bed alteration simply by saying that they are in control of that as the trustee agency, and it's the responsibility of the applicant to essentially make that application and comply with those requirements. And I think if you look at the response that Fish and Game gave on that, they pretty much concur with that approach. The only thing that they seem somewhat concerned about is that they didn't think the environmental document may be complete enough for them to use in the sense of issuing a stream bed alteration agreement. However, as the agency, as a responsible agency under CEQA, they have the option to require the applicant whatever additional studies they want at the time they make that application. And, not to speak ill of their process, but quite frankly, until the applicant makes that stream bed alteration agreement, I don't think you can conclusively state whether or not Fish and Game is going to require one of them, because they've told us in the past that we can't tell, that they are the final arbiter of it. So from our standpoint, and it kind of gets back to my previous comment, I think that in the end, the mitigation measures and if you look back at the back part of the report, they're laid out in a chart for you. Those are the things that we are requiring. I think that even with the additional studies, you would probably come up with the same requirements, especially given the fact that Fish and Game says they only recognize studies for a year or 2 years in the case of biologic or botanical resources. And if this project takes several years to even proceed, my feeling is that we'll be requiring the applicant to do those walkovers again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One other question I had was, as I went through the 3 reports, the Phase 1 environmental I found to be lacking much detail. I was actually quite surprised that the cultural study was much more detailed than the environmental. I expected it to be the other way around. So one of my concerns that I had with the lacking detail in the environmental is as we get into the project and things, for example, possibility of asbestos and other materials at the site, what conditions are built into the project that are going to address those types of concerns?
There are a number of things that are actually already contained within state or federal law in regards to it, but certainly prior to or even during construction, we would require that the site be adequately monitored to make sure that, number one, any potential hazardous material is removed from the property. Number two, there are already laws in place that if something is uncovered during construction, in other words, let's say there's drums of material buried that no one's aware of, perhaps not even, the applicant or construction. If they were to find those, if those were to be uncovered, basically sites are shut until somebody can come out and actually take a look at it and verify what the material is and what needs to be done to mitigate it. To kind of give a prime example of that, when the city was working through and working with LA County on the construction of the Sheriff's Department building, we had done a fairly extensive evaluation, but even then they found cisterns that were filled with used oil and other things that we weren't aware was there. And the procedure was pretty clear. You stopped work, you got all the workers out, you called in the appropriate people to look at it, determine what the substance was, and list what the mitigation to it was. But I do understand your concern about the Phase 1 study. If you were to ask me the one study that I would be a little bit leery about, it's that lack of maybe completeness in that Phase 1 study. I would have been like you. I wished it would have been a little bit more, but I think there are already adequate safeguards in place through other agencies and laws that would take care of any potential significant effect to that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to add? Questions, comments? You did point out, Mr. Ludicky, the comment from Fish and Game regarding the jurisdictional drainage. It's an interesting sentence. To minimize additional requirements, blah, blah, blah. The CEQA document should fully identify the potential impacts to lake, stream, or riparian resources or any listed species, or provide adequate avoidance, mitigations, monitoring, reporting, comments. I take that to mean that a sufficient analysis wasn't done of the stream bed to start with, that it was somewhat overlooked.
Yeah, they clearly
mitigation,
out.
The mitigation is contact Fish and Game. I mean, the staff's recommendation for mitigation is contact Fish and Game to determine a stream bed alteration agreement if it's necessary. However, their comment back to the city, to the agency, says you really didn't do a good enough job, and you didn't even really analyze it. That's why I read that sentence under number 5 on page 3, 2/3 of the way down the next to last paragraph, beginning to minimize. And maybe I'm misreading it.
No, I think what you're reading is, and I think you've stated it correctly, their belief, if I can kind of read between their lines, the way Fish and Game responds, is they're saying, we don't necessarily believe that your document provides us sufficient basis for determining what the mitigation might be or the impact may be to the stream bed, if in fact it is a stream bed. So I think it's pretty clear that if I were sitting in Fish and Game's position, they would probably, at such time that application came in, they would probably ask the applicant for an updated set of studies, probably to their protocol level, in order to determine what that impact is and what that mitigation might be.
So then it begs the question, how can this body make a finding of conformance of a mitigated neg deck with that hanging out there?
Yeah, I guess if you were to take
Plus what Mr. Berkey had, the point Mr. Berkey had raised regarding the Phase 1, how can we make an informed finding with these gaps in the reports and in the comments back from a custodial agency who has the jurisdiction?
Well, I'm not sure. I guess the one area that you might have some concern about in it, and quite frankly, we've had this situation with Fish and Game before, so I guess I'm not as as deeply concerned about it because they tend to do a pretty decent job of sending their own biologists out. But I guess the one thing that you can't be absolutely certain about, going back to kind of the botanical issue, is there something in that jurisdictional drainage that potentially you couldn't adequately mitigate? That would be the one area that might be of a concern.
So to solve that, then, it might be prudent for the commission to make a finding and recommendation that the previous studies be conducted under the current protocols required by California Department of Fish and Game, and that a new Phase 1 analysis, a complete Phase 1 analysis be provided, and that the mitigated, based on that, then the mitigated neg deck be recirculated, and we can consider a complete report in the near future.
Yeah, that is an option. I would say, kind of particularly in the biological area, since Fish and Game is probably the main agency concerned about that. If you were to look at redoing studies, I would suggest that you ask or direct, ask is probably not the right word. Direct.
Historical analysis.
Well,
biological.
On the biological side, I think you would simply say, the report ought to address the issues raised by Fish and Game in their letter. And as I indicated before, I think some of their concerns are really non-issues, but there's nothing specifically I can point to in the biological report that says this issue is a non-issue.
So if I understand you correctly, the biological and the Phase 1 are likely deficient. I'm not putting words in your mouth. Those are my words. And for the commission to make a proper finding, maybe those ought to be reconsidered.
That's certainly something the commission can consider.
Thank you. Anything else from anyone?
Well, one last statement is the other consideration is that with the conditions and mitigations that are built into the project, that we have the safeguards in place to overcome some of these inconsistencies, correct?
That is staff's position on the matter, yes. But is it as thorough as I would like in terms of the background reports? Probably not if I were to, want every I dotted and every T crossed. But I think the overall weight of the record would support the position that we have. Otherwise, I wouldn't make the recommendation to you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. What's your pleasure, folks?
I'll make a motion that we adopt resolution number 09-36, approving tentative parcel map number 66115.
You have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, any further discussion?
Can we add that,
I want to turn on your mic.
too much technology here. Can we add that we're asking to have the Phase 1 environmental, the biological, and the historical studies redone for the thing? And Brian, as much respect as I think all of us have here, and we certainly do listen to everything that you say, and we've enjoyed working with you for such a long time here. And I just have to agree with you. You know, there are always things that fall through the cracks, and I just don't want this to happen in this case.
And I don't think what you're suggesting is in order to the motion before us. The motion is to adopt the resolution as presented without further analysis or study. And the commission would be making, if the motion passes, the commission would be making a finding certifying the environmental document and approving the tentative track map as presented. So I don't tell you how to vote, but if you're not in favor of that and you want further study, you would vote no.
I guess I'm saying that.
Okay. So the motion before us is to vote in favor of the project and certifying the environmental document. You would vote yes, otherwise you'd vote no. That'd be correct, Mr. Adams? Thank you. All right. So, are we ready to vote? All right. Vote. The motion fails on a vote of 4 noes and 3 yeses. So, the motion would be in order then, given the applicant's position on a no vote, they would need some guidance. So I would suggest a motion to reconsider this matter at a future time and instructing staff to consider further study and analysis relative to the biological as well as the Phase 1 reports. That makes sense?
Yeah, those would be the two areas that would be concerned then from the commission's standpoint.
All right.
Potential.
So the motion, so that. I'll make that motion. So do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Do we have discussion? Everyone clear on the motion? All right. Those in favor would be to do further study and have the applicant staff do further study on the project, and we'll reconsider it at a future time. So those in favor would vote yes. Those opposed would vote no. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, and I appreciate everyone's time on this. All right, we clear on that? What we need to do?
Yes, I think we understand that.
All right, next item is item number 4, new public hearings, conditional use permit 96-01, amendment number 2. The applicant is David Shamian, I'm sorry, and it's an amendment to previous conditional use permit to delete a condition, in effect removing a raised median in 18th Street West off of Avenue K. So without objection, the public hearing is open. Do we have an applicant to speak on this?
I have no applicant. I believe all we have is the letter, if I'm correct.
So let's have a staff report then on that, just to be clear on what we're doing here. Thank you.
Chairman Volson, Commissioners, the applicant has requested that condition be modified that would eliminate the requirement for a median in 18th Street West. As background to this, the applicant first applied to have a conditional use permit to allow a gas station to be constructed. At that time, in May of 1996, the Planning Commission denied that request. Upon appeal in May of 1996, or in June of 1996, the City Council approved the CUP, but made a condition that would prohibit any driveway access onto 18th Street West. The applicant was not satisfied with that and sought to amend his conditional use permit. In July of 1997, Planning Commission again heard this case and again denied the amended conditional use permit, and it went to City Council once more. City Council approved the amended conditional use permit and added a condition that would allow for driveway access onto 18th Street West only if a raised median were constructed. At the time, the staff and City Council, the idea was that if there were a median there, it would discourage any truck traffic from driving through the neighborhood. And over the intervening years, it's become apparent that some unintended results happen from building the median. We have vehicles that will go down and make either illegal U-turns beyond the median and come back to the service station, or make three-point turns, and it's caused some disruption to the neighborhood. So the applicant requested that we reconsider the requirement for the median. Our traffic division went out and investigated, and basically has determined that there are some problems with the way that the street is functioning with the median, and it did not have the intended results, and therefore Public Works was not objecting to the request to have the median removed. Therefore, staff is recommending to the Planning Commission that they approve the amended conditional use permit allowing for the median to be removed. Now, the median would be removed by the applicant at his expense. It would not be something that the city would undertake. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Mr. Jacobs?
Yeah, can you tell me, give me some guidance as far as conditional use permit when it comes before the city? Is it customary to review the entire conditional use permit, previous conditional use permit, and the operation, or do you look at it piecemeal?
I would defer that question to Mr. Ludicky. I think he's much more versed in that.
Generally, from a staff standpoint, we look at the specific issue that is being requested to be looked at, in this case the median. We will look at the operation of the use to the extent that it affects or is affected by the particular item that is being, that is the area of concern. Now, if it's I guess I'm trying to find an example here. If it's something that is integral to the operation of the use, and I guess the best example I can give is a number of years ago we had a use permit issued on a site that was being used as a nightclub. Well, the nightclub itself was causing problems. I mean, clearly, in that instance, you had to look at the entire operation because it was the use itself that was creating the problem. Here, I would say that we looked at this a lot more narrowly. We looked at the specific issue of the median and how that affected traffic flow in and off of 18th Street West. I don't think that we really looked to any great extent about the rest of the on-site flow other than, you know, how does the median really affect the neighborhood or the flow of traffic from that driveway, because that was the reason for its initial imposition.
I guess my only concern when I say that, because when I look at the median, and I myself, the first time I ever went to this location, I did a three-point turn. So I was illegal. But I also have a hard time believing that the owner wants this done just because of the neighborhood. I would assume that he would feel that it would help his business, and in doing so might create more traffic. And when I look at the picture, I see that there's cars on the lot that actually I don't know for sure that those are parking places. So I would assume even on a day that doesn't look that busy, you have a parking issue. So I just kind of want to go on record as just, not so much on record, I just want to be clear in my position. Do you feel that we should be looking at just the median today? Because if you're ever going to look at parking, it probably will never come up again.
Well, I guess from my standpoint, you know, we looked at the median specifically in regards to the effect on the neighborhood, because that was the stated reason it was imposed. I agree with you that I'm sure the applicant's primary reason has little or nothing to do with the neighborhood concern, and he's more concerned about, how easily traffic enters or leaves his site. From the commission's standpoint, you certainly are within your rights to look at the overall site if you can find a connection between the modification and a potential effect on the original findings of the conditional use permit. I don't know, and this is something we can kind of debate, I guess. I don't know whether or not simply the removal of the median creates more of an impact on on-site traffic or doesn't. I think it certainly may affect the direction of travel that someone may go. I think there's also the question, we don't have the city's traffic engineer here, but there's also been reportedly people who still want to go south on 18th Street West who apparently take it upon themselves to use the wrong side of the street to get past the median and skirt down. So there's also, I guess, that safety issue. Although I'm not sure breaking the law is a justification for changing something.
Can I ask another question?
Go right ahead.
I get this is probably more for Carlisle, but I do know that having that median there makes that road very narrow. And so I have never seen a parking problem on the side of those streets. But once that median is removed, it will add a little bit more space to that street. Do you think that you may get encroachment in front of those property owners for parking?
As far as on the west side of 18th Street West, I don't know that would happen. On the east side, there's still going to be two turn lanes, a left and a right, so there wouldn't be any parking allowed. We would prohibit that. In all honesty, I don't know if there are any signs posted that prohibit parking on the west side, but if we were concerned or had an issue with that, we could always post it as no parking if that became a problem. I honestly don't know if it's posted that way today.
I'll make a quick comment. I went by the site Monday after our study session because of that question being raised, and I see no way that parking could take place on either side of the road with the median gone without creating accidents. I mean, there just isn't enough room to get by them and stay in the lane on either side.
I'm fine. Thanks.
All right. Anyone else? I'm looking for something. So, going back through the staff reports in it, our resolution 0616, which is a standard conditional use permit conditions, I couldn't find any reference in this, in the previous actions of the Planning Commission or City Council that reference those standard conditions as we have typically before us now. For instance, in the next item we have Resolution 0616 as a standard condition which is attached to a project. I couldn't tell whether or not that existed in the previous actions of the previous commissions and City Council relative to this CUP, since it was done in 01 or 96 or whenever, originally established in 1996. So it was never heard, it's never been heard in, quote, modern times, my interpretation. And the reason I raised the issue, go ahead. You're not excused, you have to stay.
Well, it was worth a shot. What can I say? Actually, though, if you look back, because my mind was telling me that we did have something in place at the time, and yes, we did. But I don't know that I have it for you. It's if you look at the proposed conditions list back to Resolution 90, and I admit it's a little bit complicated because of the appeals and everything, but Resolution 97-95 does eventually pull back to a conditional use permit 9601 conditions list that says all standard conditions as set forth in Planning Commission Resolution number 9110 shall apply. That was the former conditional use permit standard conditions list that existed at the time, and I'll tell you that it's all of the typical boilerplate stuff indicating, you know, the things good for 2 years. It had to, you know, you had to submit these particular plans, all of the primary things that would have been required. So there was a standard conditions list, but yes, it was different than the one that we currently use.
Do you recall, since you're testing your memory, as long as you don't test mine, we're okay. Condition number 25 in 0616 calls out specifically, the applicant is hereby advised that the use of any signs, stringers, or pennants, banners, or streamers, cluster of flags, or similar attention-getting devices are prohibited except where there has been prior approval from the planning department.
I would almost, but not quite, stake my job on saying yes, that was in there, because that has been a standard condition of ours for a while. And I think that came about actually in the late 80s when we started applying it to commercial projects. So I'm going to say that, I'm going to go a little bit out on a limb and say that yes, I think it was in there. Probably not that exact one, but number.
So if this particular project, for instance,
yes,
has on each street frontage 2 roughly 3x4 or 4x4 wooden signs on 4x4 posts directing and advertising, that would be an inappropriate sign, probably. A banner affixed to the side of one of the buildings might be an inappropriate thing to have, or 4 banners on another series of buildings on the site, or a couple of portable A-boards on the drive aisle, or 3 temporary signs attached to the main building, the convenience store, or 4 banners attached to pole signs on the drive aisles would probably be inappropriate as well. And the reason I raise these issues is because I've raised these issues before on applications and on existing conditions in the city that I feel need to be addressed by either code enforcement or whomever addresses these issues. But since we have this application before us, and based on your previous statement that this applicant should be complying with the sign ordinances and not installing prohibited signs, I raise the issue so it's on the record.
Okay.
And I think personally it needs to be dealt with.
Okay. I will forward that information to our code enforcement people who actually are right now embarked upon a program of, to quote the Director of Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization, they are gently bringing them into compliance, quote unquote.
And that's
but I will make her aware of that.
Very good. All right. Anyone else have anything to add on this matter before we close the public hearing? No speakers on this at all? Nope.
No, I don't
All right,
have
then
any.
it's, without objection, the public hearing is closed, and a motion would be in order.
I move the motion that adopt resolution number 10-01 approving conditional use permit number 96-01 AM2.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. All right, next item is item number 5, which is public hearing on conditional use permit 0911. The applicant is El Torero Mexican Restaurant. Conditional use permit for the sale and consumption of alcohol beverages, type 47 license in a new location at 830 West Avenue L, Suite, whatever, 130 something, whatever it is. How about Suite 139? All right. So, without objection, the public hearing is open. And do we have an applicant to address us? We do have a letter on file from Thomas Kessler, who is now approaching the podium. Good evening and welcome.
Tom Kessler, I'm an attorney in town. This is Vincent Murillo, who is the owner of the El Toreo Incorporated. I thought a little background might be helpful here. We are having a little trouble with the El Toreo that's next to the colleges, the medical colleges on 10th Street, and we think in the next couple of years we're going to be out of our lease there. We're going to close that one down, and we need another place in Lancaster. We're also not thrilled with the parking situation in Palmdale on 10th Street West and Palmdale Boulevard, and we think that maybe we won't have that restaurant there otherwise. We also like very much the way we've done the restaurant at J and 17th Street East. That seems to be very, very accepted. We seem to be doing well there, and we like the way we've designed it and changed the inside. And so just as a corporate strategy of moving ahead, having good locations, modernizing them, and providing what people want, and also thinking of some business succession issues that he has, bringing family members along into the business, that this would be a good feather in our cap, a good star in our crown, so to speak.
All right, thank you. Vincent, are you going to have anything to say to us, or?
Well, I would like to have be there and serve you people, offer you the best I can for a long time.
Very good. Thank you. There may be some questions. I'm not sure. Anyone have any questions of the applicant? No? All right.
Hungry, that's all. I'm just taquitos El Toreo. You can't beat them. And I still miss the place on Sierra Highway, so I'm back old school.
I think I was there once.
Yeah. Me too.
What's the day?
That's about right. All right. Thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate it. Thank you. You are aware of the conditions that have been imposed or recommended by staff. I'm assuming you've issued a letter indicating you're in agreement, and there was a revised resolution prepared and distributed, and I'm assuming you received a copy of that.
Yes, we did.
You did?
We're advised of the conditions, and we've written a letter accepting the conditions.
All right. Specifically that on this particular location, with the addition of this restaurant, it maxes out the restaurant capability of the center, and there would be no additional restaurants or an expansion of anyone that's there, really.
Yes, we're aware of that.
Okay, you're clear of that. Okay, good. And this doesn't affect you, but I'll save my comments for a moment. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any other speakers on this, Mr. Ludicky?
I have no other cards, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. So without objection, then the public hearing is closed. My comments are about signs again, and Mr. Ludicky and I visited that particular shopping center some weeks ago, and when we were driving around looking at signs. And I pointed out at that time, and it still exists today, that there were two signs on the street, wooden signs advertising a nail place. One of the fast food restaurants has well in excess of 25% window coverage on their windows advertising signs. There's a now open banner on Suite 101, which has been open for, I don't know, a year and a half maybe, and it's badly deteriorated. And the signs on building address 818 are both those tenants are gone. They're closed. And I think our sign ordinance requires a removal within, 90 days or something like that?
I think that's the way it reads, yes.
So they're still hanging up there. And there's a banner on Suite 137, a very large banner that actually limits visibility into the suite as well as being able to identify the suite number. I did notice today, which I've driven by it a number of times, I think we all have, the adjacent property to the south, the property line masonry wall, has a banner affixed to it that advertises the self-storage facility, which is, I don't know, 8 or 12 feet long. I don't know. It's a huge sucker, but I don't think that conforms to the sign ordinances of the city either. So I just thought I'd point those out again, and maybe the code enforcement folks can nudge the tenants and property owner down there to clean up their signs. So
they're proceeding, so we'll.
So, Mr. Murillo, when this project, assuming it gets approved, and installs his signs, they won't be obscured by illegal banners and pennants and such. All right. Okay. So, do we have any other comments from anyone?
I think the only other comment I wanted to make is not this particular project, but the owner of that development, the landlord. He's obviously fully aware that we have maxed out on our restaurant space and parking. And what would happen if this landlord were to sell that property to somebody else? How would they know about that?
Well, there's a couple of ways. Number one, we record all conditional use permits against the property, so anybody, doing their due diligence should have the opportunity to kick that up on any kind of report. And we often have people coming in asking about what does this mean, because they've kicked up on a title report or something, a reference to a conditional use permit. Secondly, because our approval is attached to the land and not to an individual property owner, I would assume that anyone buying is going to do their due diligence, although I can't force them to do that. But it would be clear in their record that they are subject to both a site plan review, which was the original approval for the overall center, as well as these additional conditions that were placed by this conditional use permit.
All right. Anyone else? Any further? All right, then it's appropriate to close the public hearing without objection and consider a motion on this matter.
Make a motion that we adopt resolution number 10-03, approving conditional use permit number 09-11.
Thank you. Have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Jacobs? Thank you. All right. Any further discussion? It's been moved and seconded then. Please vote. And passes unanimously, 7-0. Congratulations. All right. The next item on our agenda is director's announcements. Mr. Ludicky.
Most important thing for anyone interested in attending the Planning Commissioners Institute in Monterey in March, please let Joy Reyes know of your interest so that we can make the necessary arrangements.
Thank you. Yeah, we have in our packet tonight is a copy of an email she sent to us all, as well as the brochures and identifying. This is the same, or similar, not the same, but similar institute we most of us attended last year in Anaheim, I believe. So those of you that are considering going, please notify Ms. Reyes as soon as possible, right? All right. Anything else, Mr. Ludicky?
A reminder to you that at your November Planning Commission, you indicated that your February meeting would be the one at which you wanted to begin taking up the rezoning issue, citywide rezoning. We do have the citywide rezoning map just about ready to put out for general review of the public, so that they'll have roughly a month before this initial meeting that you have, so that hopefully anyone who has any comments for you to consider will have ample opportunity to look at that and comment to you. We will also have coming to you fairly soon after that some minor revisions to text of some of our zones to comply with some of the changes that we made in the land use designations on the general plan, as well as the mixed-use zone classification text. And based upon the Commission's stated desire, we are not expecting that you are going to take any action on this at your February meeting, but it's merely the opportunity to ask questions, take testimony, and we expect that you will be perhaps in a position to look at taking action at your March meeting, which is the time frame that we originally discussed.
So the 16th of February would be a public hearing on the proposed land use map?
Rezoning map or citywide zoning map, plus to the extent that anyone's got any comments at that point, the text of the mixed use or other.
So it's possible, depending on the input and the volume or number of folks wishing to communicate, we may need to hold another hearing interim between then and March.
Possibly. We'll kind of see what the feedback is. We will be providing the information out to groups that would normally have concerns about this.
But they'll have about approximately a month in advance of the hearing, at least.
Correct.
To provide written comment or whichever, and then testimony and so forth.
Correct.
All right. Very good. Okay. I'm sure we're all aware, we all received a email from the city clerk indicating the mayor's desire to consider appointments to this commission as well as the other commissions in the city. So those of us who who have a desire to be appointed to this commission or any other commission for that matter, we should avail themselves of the opportunity to file another application. So new applications will be considered. Your previous application will not be considered. Is that the way we understand it?
That's the way I understand it, yes. And I believe that's been reiterated by the city clerk's office.
All right. Very good. So everyone received that, I'm sure. Okay, good. All right. Any other items that we want to talk about? Anyone? Nope. All right. Then, this is the time for public business from the floor. This portion of the agenda allows an individual the opportunity to address the commission on any subject regarding city business. Under state legislation, no action can be taken on non-agenda items. Members of the public should be aware of this when addressing the commission regarding items not specifically referenced on the agenda. Please complete a speaker's card for the recording secretary. Individual speakers would be limited to 3 minutes each. Do we have anyone wishing to address us on non-agenda items?
I have no cards.
All right.
I don't
Thank
see
you very
anyone
much.
rising.
All right, then. We then stand adjourned till Monday, February 8th, 2010 at 5:30 p.m. in the Planning Large Conference Room here at City Hall. Thank you.